Thank you very much. And thank you to SIPB for having this event. Thank you. I was asked to talk about a bunch of the hacks that we did when I was active in SIPB, which is sort of the 1999 to 2006 era. And then I was asked to do another half hour to talk about some of our research now that I'm unfortunately no longer here, now on the West Coast, which would be another half hour. And maybe we could just take a vote half an hour, and if you want to hear the less good half of the talk will be the second half. We'll just take a vote, very SIPB, and then we'll see how it goes. So the first half, I think for me, like as I tried to say yesterday, like SIPB was just like this crazy place that you would go, and other crazy people would go there as sort of like a home base of operations. There were all kinds of things that were happening there. So like Nick and Golia and Liana would do these protests, and then they'd come back and they'd be like, I just got yelled at by the admissions office. It was awesome. This is a very formative memory. I know you may not have talked about it in your talk, but so I'm just talking about it, yeah. And you know, what else would happen? I don't know, Thomas Bushnell would like become a monk or a friar, and then he'd come back and be like, oh, you know, I changed my name or whatever. And, you know, I got yelled at by Richard Stallman. Those stories became sort of perennial. Jayhawk would like, you know, be Jayhawked. And it just seemed like a place where all kinds of crazy things would happen. There were different kinds of people who would come there. I remember being like the lone West Campus person there. Like everyone would be like, don't you agree, like, you know, Random Hall and East Campus and Senior House are the only people worth talking to, and like no one west of Mass Ave except Random, which doesn't really count, is worth talking to. And I'd be like, I'm actually from French House. And they're like, well, you don't count, Keith. You're one of the good ones, you know. You're not like other West Campus people. What was that? Yes, it was okay. I survived. So one of the things that I got very into in the sort of early era was trying to like watch movies. And people like Mycroft would be there. It was a probably different place. Like, did you have people that like, you'd come in and there's like somebody sleeping on the couch who's like probably in their 40s and you have no idea who they are. And then they wake up and they're like, don't mind me. Like that, it was a different kind of place. That probably doesn't happen anymore, right? Young people? Right. I don't know. I was actually hoping to crash there tonight. Okay, great. It was a different kind of place. So one thing we got very into was trying to watch DVD movies and trying to descramble DVDs, because as you probably know, the DVD discs they're encrypted. And you can't just play them. You know, it's not like a CD-ROM, which you can rip, which, of course, Monty Montgomery, who was one of my heroes, you know, created, like, the best CD ripping software, the CD Paranoia. And that you could just rip, and you can get, like, the perfect audio. And I think, like, just now, Amazon has launched HD streaming, you know, of audio, which means it's just as good as what we had in 1997 with CD Paranoia. They finally reached that level. You know, CD quality audio. But you couldn't do this with a DVD. And, you know, if you were interested in movies or in video compression, like, I really wanted to see, like, take apart the DVD and see how it was put together, and you just couldn't do this. And at the time, Mycroft claimed that he hacked it long ago, but he didn't want to tell anyone because he didn't want to destroy the DVD format. But as far as the public was concerned, there was no public way to descramble these DVDs. And then these anonymous European people figured it out. Well, I don't know if they're from an anonymous continent. People figured it out, and one day appeared on a mailing list source code for playing these DVDs, or for descrambling these DVDs. And you could play them very, very slowly on Linux. So there was like an MPEG player, and you could, you know, descramble the DVD and pipe it to like a, you know, MPEG 2 deck, and you could just watch the video at like 1 frame per like 3 seconds. And that was like pretty much the coolest thing that I could imagine. And my contribution was, I was very into audio-video synchronization, and I still am. So like yesterday, when we were watching that movie, it's still with the open source tool, still a problem, the AV synchronization. That has like occupied like a surprisingly large amount of my life. Anyway, so like my single contribution was I made a player where you could descramble the DVD using this like European developed software. This guy, John Johansson, ended up taking credit for him, but it wasn't him. It was like anonymous people. And you could pipe it, but simultaneously you could take the audio packets and pipe them to the AC3 decoder, and the video packets and pipe them to an MPEG-2 decoder in different sub-processes, and kind of use like F-flush to like make it in sync, like roughly in sync. And then I was very proud, I went to the SIPB bookshelf, which I hope you still have, and I got the Foley and Van Dam book on graphics, and I implemented Floyd Steinberg dithering to be able to render the movie in black and white, and we played it on Bitsy, which was the black and white terminal that had previously, the VAX. So that was like my proudest accomplishment of like freshman year, was we just sat in the office and we watched The Matrix. We only had one DVD, and it was The Matrix, and we used to just sit there and play it on the office speakers, watching it in 1-bit, black and white, and then it didn't work for any of the interesting scenes of The Matrix because those scenes had multi-angle features, like the fight scenes or whatever. Those, it would go to this multi-angle and my player would crash because we didn't really handle that. So it was only like the talk parts or the less exciting parts. But I got to know The Matrix actually extremely well. And I don't mean the movie, I mean the layout on disc. So people used to quiz me. They'd be like, Keith, there is no spoon. I'd be like, oh, that's, in VOB file number 7, 32,000 sectors in, and then I was actually, if you look in the minutes from my SIPB meeting, I was quizzed on that. That was like, for me to become a SIPB member, they like named a line from The Matrix, and I had to give within 30 seconds the offset in the disk where you could find it. I barely passed freshman chemistry. 5'11", because I was doing all this. I actually missed my flight home Thanksgiving, my flight home to see my parents. I slept through it because I had stayed up in the SIPI office working on DVDs. It's good times. Anyway, so eventually, however, the fun had to come to an end, and the movie industry got very angry at everyone for distributing this information and the encryption keys and the software, and they sued like 500 people to try and contain what they called the trade secret of this information. And later there was a different suit under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act for anti-circumvention tools. But the first one was, this is a trade secret, and you shouldn't be spreading around these encryption keys, you shouldn't be spreading around this software. And I felt very personally offended by this. Like, I had invested my family Thanksgiving to instead be learning these encryption keys. And how dare they try and take that out of my brain? Like, this is my sovereign knowledge. So we printed up the encryption keys. We made a little mnemonic poster here. Oh, it can't do PostScript. Okay, hang on. Oh, here it is in ping. Here we go. We made this little poster, and we put it all around campus to make sure the knowledge would be in people's minds. So these are the actual encryption keys in base 62, and we tried to remember as many of them as I can. So whenever I see Matthew Belmonte, in fact, last night, he must be watching the stream, but he emailed me. He's like, phew, 1E1Y, because that was one of the easier ones to remember. And I'd always be like 7UMTZW, and some of these were harder, like 6JQ FRZ, or 6L11L1L. Like, these were like the watchwords. Like, you try to remember this so that they can't take it away. And then we also had them in decimal, if that's easier to remember. And so eventually, the goal was to try and like maybe get a tattoo, because there had been the RSA tattoo. So the goal was to try and get like the DVD descrambling software down to a tattoo, because you could buy it on 3 T-shirts. That was the technology of the time, was there were 3, you had to buy the full set of 3 T-shirts. And that was sort of expensive. So Mars and I tried to get it down to just 1 T-shirt. And so we started, we have the Git repository here. Well, let's look at it here. So here was our first commit, was 2000, November 28th. This is like translating the C code for the descrambling into a more, high-level language, Perl, like the language that you would want to use. And we have all kinds of names here. Look, because we're trying to understand it. So naturally, you change the variable names, like people like Gary equals Mark right shifted to the 12th. Chris equals Mark right shifted to the 14th. I don't know who Chris would have been. Chris Lesniewski, maybe. Yeah, okay. And then so we got it working, and then we just worked on it, and here's Mars. So what we figured out, I think Mark actually figured out, is that there's these 2 LFSRs, and you don't need this big table. There's actually like a much easier way to generate it. It's like the Cartesian product of these 2 LFSRs. So we got that stopping for the night, and yes, this is my final answer. Remove another character. So this was fun. This was like early code golf. And then eventually this was the proudest thing we ever did, is we got on the gallery of CSS descramblers. So this guy, David Turetsky at Carnegie Mellon, who was most well known for annoying people on the internet. So he previously had posted all these confidential Scientology documents, which were about, at the time, the confidential beliefs of the Scientological religion. And they had picketed outside his office at Carnegie Mellon, like very nasty stuff, like David Turetsky is a child molester, like really stuff you don't want outside your workplace. So then when he heard that there's like another category of banned knowledge but it was banned by like major corporations. He was like, well, that's going to be way easier than like people that are going to call me like the, Universal Studios is not going to call me a child molester for this. So he posted this gallery of CSS descramblers, and the first one was the original source code, and then here is another one, and then we were very proud, Marcia and I got to be number 3 on the gallery of CSS descramblers. That was like possibly my proudest accomplishment ever. And actually all of SIPB like got into this. So Mycroft, like our nemesis, started being like, well, I got to make it even shorter. And Mycroft actually did discover some things that we didn't even know about the structure of the DVD descrambling. And he got it shorter, unfortunately not shorter in a line count sense, which is what counts because, Perl is better. But his was in C. So he got it shorter. And then we have another, actually Omri Schwartz, another SIPB member, is down here, and he had it in English. So he had these things where you translate it into English, cssauth.eng. It's very readable. Very readable. This is the definition of the function. And there was actually a rap song, or is it more of a folk song? This function is void. Anyway, this was like really good stuff. And eventually then it became very controversial, and so we were on, I think our proudest moment was we were on someone's pager. I think like Kana McCoy was like, dude, Keith and Mark were on my pager today. Like we were on like the Daily Tech News, the shortest DVD scrambler. So we were in Wired, new DVD scrambler. And Wired actually did an analysis of the Perl code. Actually, here, I'll show you the, there you go. It's very dramatic moment. There we go. So here we go. So we got these, thank you. We had these T-shirts printed up, and I am a circumvention device forbidden by the law. Do not manufacture me, import me, offer me to the public, provide me, traffic in me, or in any part of me. You've been warned. Oh, we all became legal experts too, I should mention. Like, we all used to sit around reading the law and debating it, and eventually we got branched into other parts of the law, and like Debian. We talked about like how to distribute encrypted software, and eventually, much later, I got an appointment at Stanford as an engineering professor, and there's like a negotiation process where you sit down with the woman who's now the dean, Jennifer Whittam, who I hope will never watch this, and they're like, well, we're very pleased to make you this offer to be assistant professor, and I was like, okay, well, let's negotiate. She's like, well, the salary is non-negotiable. I was like, okay, well, I hope they give you some money to start out as a researcher, to tide you over until you get grants. I was like, well, maybe could you match the package from, somewhere else? And she's like, well, maybe you should go to somewhere else. They know what they're doing at Stanford. So finally I was like, well, because I spent all this time in SIPB bullshitting about the law, can I be a law professor at Stanford University? And she was like, yeah, I don't care, sure. So I was actually officially assistant professor of law by courtesy at Stanford Law School for 3 years on the strength of this SIPB office law degree that I got. No joke. And they rose in the rankings while I was on their faculty, I think from 6th to 3rd, thanks to me. So anyway, so we were in the text. SIPB members hack draws legal controversy. Usually 6 lines of text won't get you more than a poor poem, but it thrusts Keith and Marcia into the middle of a major controversy. We see the source code as a recipe for a process, like a cookbook recipe is a process for food, and we think that's protected by the First Amendment. My mom wrote to me when this came out, and she was very upset. She was like, Keith, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, shut the fuck up and don't get sued by the movie studios. The most upset I was that somewhere in this article, the movie studios are quoted saying that they doubt that it actually works. And I was like, how dare you? How dare you? That was like the most upsetting. So I thought, let's talk, and there's an editorial, the battle over DVD encryption. I hope the tech was on our side. So we actually taught an IAP class about this, about descrambling DVD, because I thought, let's do it in a protected way. We'll make it instructional. So we had an official IAP class, and here's the, let's see, where's the poster, DVD poster. This was the ad for it, Decrypting DVD IAP Guide Description. So we had one on technical issues and one on legal issues. And we had, I wrote to all the people that should come. So I wrote to Jack Valenti, who was then the famous head of the Motion Picture Association of America, and he emailed me back like a very polite reply. I don't know if I could get it. But anyway, he was like, no. But very politely, let's see if I can get it. Valenti Beast. See, Google. No. I thought that he wrote back. Anyway, I was very proud of this. Where do you see it? Here it is. Speaking at Cambridge, here we go. My schedule is crammed. I rather enjoy entering the lion's den, but this time I'm cabin crimmed and confined. Anyway, so he didn't come, but they did dutifully send some poor guy. I felt bad for this guy, but he knew what he was getting into. What was that? Yes, well, this guy here showed up. Well, yeah, maybe they sent their clean-shaven guy, for the East Coast. So this was me and Hal Abelson and Jonathan Zittrain, who now is on the faculty at Harvard Law School, and this guy. And we had this, some picture here. Here's a very young me presenting. So we were very proud of this. So, and then that, ultimately, 15 years later, this Perl script became art. So there was a bunch of people who printed this on various things, and somebody printed it on a necktie. And I just got one and had it in my closet. And then 15 years later, they were doing an algorithm auction at the Smithsonian, at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Museum. And they asked me if I would donate my necktie. So I did. And Mark, you were there, right? Yeah, so we both went to New York City, and I wore this T-shirt. And there were all these art people, and they were all made up. And they auctioned off the necktie and my view graphs from that 2001 IAP class. Jerry Sussman was there, too. He was auctioning off the Scheme chip. And here it is in the Wall Street Journal. So we always tried to get it printed because we thought they couldn't suppress the news. But here it is on the Wall Street Journal on the front page at the bottom. Art World tries to crack the code of collecting algorithms. How do admirers hold on to computers? So here is our necktie, and here's the actual code. And if you zoomed in more, you would see here's our names on the front page of the Wall Street Journal: Keith Winstein and Mark Horowitz. And here's the full Perl script. And these stipple portraits on the Wall Street Journal normally take 5 hours to do. They're done by hand. So I wrote to the artist. I was like, I would love to buy the original of this stipple portrait, And they told me that for the first time they had cheated and they had not stipple portraited the Perl because they found it unreadable. So that was it. But anyway, so this got auctioned. It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And it was I don't know, it was a fun thing to do. It was a fun thing to sort of cause trouble. Eventually the MPA said they would respond at the appropriate time. And that has not happened yet. The tie went for $2,500, including the view graphs. This guy, Daniel Benitez, who was actually also an MIT grad, yes, so yeah. Yes, so we kept it in the family. Maybe he'll let me visit it sometime. So at some point, we then got interested, I was still interested in copyright law, and we had this idea, maybe we could give everyone free music. So we read the law very carefully, and it turns out the US copyright law makes a big distinction between analog transmissions and digital transmissions. So we got, at the time, Charles Vest rode in a taxi with, well, probably not a taxi, some sort of luxury conveyance to the airport with Bill Gates. And at the end of that ride was that Bill Gates agreed to give $25 million to MIT for something that Bill Gates' people were not really clear what it was for. And they ended up spending it on a bunch of stuff, and a small sliver went to student projects. And so we proposed this project to give everyone free music. And they eventually, actually they denied that, and then we proposed it again, and they denied it again. And then I proposed 3 different projects, and they were like, well, we'll give you one, Keith. So eventually we got this.
This is how you got used to applying for grants.
This is how I got used to applying for grants. Yeah, SIPB was excellent preparation for the real world. I mean, even now, I should be honest, as a reporter, people treat you as if you were important because I represented, the largest newspaper in the country. So people treat you as if you were important. And now that I'm a faculty member, most people treat you deferentially, like students do. But I'm still on Zephyr, and that's the one place that people are real to me. On Zephyr, I talk about either when I was a reporter, I remember Chris Lesniewski, I don't know if he's still here, but he was like, no, your article sucks. And then now when I talk about my opinions, all the Google people are like, no, you don't know what what the fuck you're talking about. It's actually very healthy to have that. I would encourage all of you to go on Zephyr for the welcomingly real environment that it provides. So thank you, Google people. Okay. You're welcomingly real. You don't let people get away with BS. Okay, so we thought, could we make it possible for people to listen to music for free on the internet. And so MIT had all this cable television, it had its own cable television system. And so we went to the guy who runs it, Randy at the time, and we said, can we have like 16 free channels of cable TV? And he's like, well, you're not going to want them because the spectrum is too noisy, the amplifiers don't have enough gain. And we were like, well, what if we put all our power into the audio subcarrier and like, we don't care how the video looks. He's like, okay, if you want to do that, fine. So they were very generous. MIT, like, I don't know that you could get away with that in most other places. They were like, fine, you can have 16 channels of the cable TV spectrum, do with it what you want. So we set up this computer with 16 channel sound card, and we had a website where you could go and request to borrow the channel for an hour and then play whatever you wanted on it. You could check out these CDs, and we had a lot of money, so people suggested all the CDs we want, and then we bought them from this company that provided digital music like to the streaming industry. The company was called Loud Eye, and we set up the service. So I'll show you. This was on CNBC at the beginning. So this is 2003.
Go on, it's your pod. Ken Brown, great to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Terrific. All righty, up next, it's free, it's legal, it doesn't use the internet. A couple of those brains on the MIT campus have come up with a way to give students instant access to a huge library of music. We'll find out how the system works when we come back on Open Exchange. Alrighty, welcome back. There is a new wrinkle in the ongoing battle over music file sharing. Two MIT students have come up with a campus-wide system now that lets users listen to and record music legally. It's called the Library Access to Music Project, or LAMP. Their system entirely bypasses the web, the internet, and distributes music over MIT's own cable television system. And it could be a template for what could be the way for you to get such free music in the future. Here to help us understand why this is such a big development, one of the inventors, Ken Winstein. He's at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Did I pronounce your name right there, Ken?
It's Keith, Tyler.
Keith, I'm sorry, Keith. Excuse me, Keith. Welcome and good to see you.
Hi.
All right. What is the linchpin of your system here? Is all the music, what? Is it on a central server, just the way it is at many of the music libraries, like Napster and so forth?
Well, the music, yes, is on a central server. What this is about making a music library that students can access from anywhere. You know, a traditional music library you have to walk to. And it might make sense to walk 15 minutes to the library to get a book that you read for 2 weeks. But we thought if you just want to listen to a 5-minute song, better not to have to walk there. So the music comes over the cable television system. And you pick the music on the internet. You go and say, I want to listen to this song. But it plays to you over the cable TV system.
So I log in and I tell the system that I want to hear September by Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Right.
And what happens then?
Well, it tells you tune to channel 70 on the cable TV system. And you tune your VCR there with your stereo, and it plays you the song. And you can pause, you can fast forward, you can rewind, you can do anything you might do with a CD player. But the audio is coming through your VCR.
Can I then burn it to a disc?
Well, you know, you might record an episode on TV too. That's something you can do. That's not the idea is just to listen to the music on demand.
I see. So it's listening. How many songs do you have in the library?
Well, what we did, we ran a survey for a whole year, and anybody who wanted to could suggest a CD. And they suggested 3,500 CDs, and we bought them all. So we have about 50,000 songs right now that people can listen to for free immediately.
What do the record companies say about this?
Well, I don't know, but you know, we went out, and the reason this took 2 years was not because it was technically difficult. It's because we had to get all these licenses in place from the songwriters and the music publishers. We had to go out and get those licenses. Now that those are in place, another thing we're doing is we're publishing on lamp.mit.edu, that's the website, we're publishing royalty-free the complete plans for the system and the software. So any other university could come out, and we think in a few months, could implement a similar system.
Presuming they have a cable television system that they could use, right?
That's correct.
Now, do you get the licenses by going through the traditional sources like ASCAP and BMI?
That's correct, yes.
So you went to them, you pay them a fee, an annual use fee, or what?
That's right. They charge, most universities have general licenses from ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. Those are the three organizations that represent songwriters. we had to pay a little extra to get cable television rights.
Keith, I'm sorry I misread your name the first time. I thought it was Ken. Keith Winstein, congratulations on this very interesting development. We'll see where it goes. We'll hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right. Young smart guy from MIT. Thanks for watching Open Exchange. We'll hope to have you back here again tomorrow. Maria Bartiromo is here to take us now to the closing bell. Hi, Maria.
All right, so unfortunately, that didn't really work because the company that we bought all that music from, Loud Eye, which was a publicly traded company, they called us that night, that Monday night, right after I got off CNBC, which I did here. I think I was just about to go on Headline News. I don't know if it would have been that. Who's that person, the host on Headline News that everybody hates? She has that southern accent. Anyway, it would not have been her. Anyway, unfortunately, we got a call. Loud Eye's lawyer called our lawyer, MIT's lawyer, to say that their whole business was a fraud. And none of the songs that they sold us did they have permission to sell to us. I should show you first. So we were in the New York Times. Let's see, where is it? Here's the first story in the New York Times. With cable TV at MIT, who needs Napster? And they quote, I was part of this. They quote Jonathan Zittrain saying that we arrayed the gerbils under the hood, so it appears to be the statutory requirement. They also have this episode, I don't know what that was. They also got this, I got this email when I was playing it once from an MIT freshman saying that she loved the music that I was playing, the Dvorak Symphony No. 8, and she'd like to get to know me better, and she signed it. I still was not sure if this was a typo or like what she meant by this. But I did politely decline the offer. Actually, I invited her to a party, but she never came. Anyway, unfortunately, so that night, the Loud Eye people called and said all the songs they had sold us had been unauthorized. They didn't actually have permission to sell any songs at all, and we would have to shut down. And we did. And actually, so Loud Eye then had to call the various record labels and apologize for being a fraudulent company. And they were particularly scared of Sony because Sony's apparently very litigious. And so the board of directors convened of this company, like a major company, and the CEO was there, Mr. Caven, and they were going to call Sony and confess that he had sold us all these Sony songs, and he fainted. In the meeting of the board of directors, the CEO of the company fainted because he just couldn't do it. And when he came to, they agreed on a different strategy, which is to tell Sony that they had only sold us songs from the other 4 record labels, but they had not sold us any songs from Sony.
Keeping with company ethics and policy.
Yes. Well, the company was later broken up and sold to, I think, Microsoft and Nokia. But anyway, yes.
If they had the licenses, do you still think this would work?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
But could you have gotten real licenses, or was the fraud the key to being able to?
Well, no, but the fraud made it much more convenient because they could sell it just on one hard drive. So they sold us one hard drive for $30,000 that had 3,500 CDs on it. And I remember putting that in a plastic bag and bicycling from NE43 back to French House with this $30,000 object dangling from the handlebars on my bike. I still have that, actually. That hard drive is in my office at Stanford. Anyway, so what we actually had to do is spend another year, and we finally, I read the cover like much more carefully, and we came up with this plan where we would rip the CDs, we would buy the actual physical CDs, like real CDs, and rip them, but you can't rip an individual song, you have to rip what's called a transmission program, and there's this whole thing, and I made this legal argument, and they ended up deciding we could come back if we didn't get any publicity for the return. So we did, and we got SIPB volunteers came, and it was all, the great thing about SIPB was the lawyers could be like, well, you're going to have space for 2,000 CDs in, 10 CD changers. And I could just be like, yeah, no problem. I'll put it at SIPB. What are you talking about? So we were actually the first racks in the SIPB machine room. We had the first rack servers. We got those 2 racks, and we put our computers in there. But then what we really put in the racks were these 10 CD changers. Is that still in the machine room?
We did get it out of the machine room. I haven't finished taking the CDs out of the CD changer.
All right, good times.
Those weren't really racks. They were ersatz racks.
So we do have like 6 CD changers full of CDs under a desk.
Good times, good times.
There's a giveaway of CDs after.
Yeah, you should take the CDs.
There's boxes full of the CDs that I removed and put into plastic paper
Yes.
CD sleeves.
Yes, Tim.
Did you get the money back from Raleigh?
Yeah, you know what actually happened? True story. MIT made this check, and I saw it. It was an actual check from the procurement office for $30,000. but it was like $26,972. But the machine that prints the check, you might be surprised to learn this, but the English on the check, you know, it says $26,952. There's no automated means to make sure that that agrees with the digits. So there had been a typo where the digits had been like 26,925, but the English had been like 26,952. Someone had typed it out. And because of this discrepancy, it got flagged somewhere. And so they hadn't mailed the check because of that. And so we just didn't mail it. Yeah, they didn't take the drives back. Their lawyer ended up calling us. She got fired. The lawyer got fired, and then she called me, urging me to sue them. And then I told our lawyers about this, and they were just very unhappy about the whole thing. Everyone was unhappy. So we brought it back after a year. 60% is cool. Oh, here was the New York Times story. MIT music sharing service at MIT is shut down. I mean, I love the New York Times. That's why anyway, that was terrible. Anyway, so eventually it came back a year later, and it operated until 2016. So we actually shut it down. I was here just 3 years ago. We had this ceremony. Ready? Okay, so we'll do a goodbye lamp. Goodbye lamp. This is what it looked like with the 16 songs.
Don't we get snow or something?
Well, no, this is the X11 background. Can you pop an X-ray up? There we go. Okay. Is that good enough?
No.
What do you want now? Shut down. You really want to shut it down? I might have some files on here. It's okay. If I shut this down, I'm never going to get. Oh man, you really want serious.
Remember, I wanted to code for the changes. That's there, so.
Well, no, that's not here. Oh my God, you really? Okay.
You should shut it down, unplug the modulator, and then turn it back on.
There's a file here called KJW homework. Okay, I'm going to do this. Anyway, I did it. It shut down. Okay. So that was a fun thing, and that was up for like 12 years ultimately, and people played like tens of thousands of CDs. These things continue to inform my actual life. So, for example, right now, as a research project at Stanford, we're running this website, Puffer, where you can go stream live TV in your browser. There's no charge, using a different provision of the copyright law that allows us to stream broadcast television. Let's see if this works. Oh no, this would be humiliating if it's down right now. I'd never lived. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go.
Has always been.
So this is actual television. Oh, here we go.
To get to 100.
You might notice the A and the V are in sync.
Sitting on his couch.
I put a lot of effort into that.
Bruce Smith,
Here we go.
all-time sack leader with 200 career sacks.
So we were into football someday. We tried to get the NFL rules as in the SIPB thing. We were outvoted the first time, and then eventually we got it. There was some disagreement about what was the proper scope of SIPB. Like, should it be about computing services, or should we get the NFL rules? We had a lot of those sort of existential questions. Let's see how many people we have watching right now. Well, that's the number of total accounts. Okay, we'll see if this loads. This Grafana is the slowest. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we have 281 people watching right now. So this has continued to sort of drive my research style, because, the fact that we are the only academic research group running a real video streaming service, we are about 1/1,000,000th the popularity of YouTube, plus or minus. But this allows us to get data on like what actually works in my actual research, which is sending data over the internet, and what doesn't. Like, we have data and other academic research groups don't, because we know the copyright law, because I was in SIPB. True story. All right, shall we move on? Let's see. Okay, I think that's about LAMP. People watch music, I got proposition, and that's pretty much the whole story. Okay. Oh, so the other thing that we were very into in those days was trying to hack the MIT card. So Andre DeHone, I think, had to go, but when I was in when I was in high school, I read about Andre DeHone hacking the RFID, the magnetic stripe MIT card. And when they put it in, it was super secure and blah, 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 it was great. And Andre and colleagues discovered that it's not, and that you can take the magnetic stripe and copy it, and you could maybe even increment it by one and make someone else's ID. I think originally your MIT ID was your social security number, and your social security number was on the magnetic stripe. So there are all kinds of problems that Andre exposed and led to them, I think, both changing the MIT IDs to not be your social security number, but also changing the number that's on the RFID, the magnetic stripe to not be your MIT ID. So then fast forward to I was actually on campus. Then I used to actually, even when I was in high school, I would save these like hotel access cards because like Andre's website told you to save those cards in case you needed to like go to MIT. I don't know, I was really, anyway, so much later MIT came out with this RFID card and they again said it was encrypted and there was a one-time pad and it was super secure and they put it on the nuclear reactor and all this stuff. So we were like, can we figure out what's going on? And the only place on campus that we knew that had a reader was the under construction Stata Center, which was still going up across the street from NE43, where the AI lab was. And so we really wanted to figure out just even what frequency are these on. So I used to have access because I worked with Jerry Sussman, and they were very trusting. And so I had access to this room of electronics because they used to be building their own chip. So a room of electronic test equipment. So we went in there at like 2 in the morning, and they had a very nice network analyzer and a very nice spectrum analyzer that was portable. And it was on this key system, but somehow the key was like taped to below the desk. So we just unlocked it, and we took the spectrum analyzer, and it was kind of heavy. And there used to be a guard in NE43 that would stop you from stealing laptops. So we're going out at like 2 in the morning, and we're carrying like this heavy thing, like this portable HP spectrum analyzer. And the guard's like very suspicious, like, what are we doing at 2 in the morning? And the guard's like, that's not a laptop, is it? And we're like, no, it's test and measurement equipment. He's like, oh, test and measurement equipment. Okay, have a great day, gentlemen. It's just like a $30,000 piece of equipment. So we set up and we figured out what frequency it's on, and we did some Googling, and eventually we found that you can read these things. So we gave this presentation eventually to the card office and the nuclear reactor people. So if you send in 125 kilohertz to this card, you get a waveform that looks like this. So this was my friend, actually, so we gave this presentation. And it was Josh, who I did LAMP with, and this guy Austin Roach and me, and we were from CCL, the Radio Society, and SIPB. What we didn't say was that I was the only one in any of those organizations. It was just, I represented those organizations. Anyway, so it turns out if you stimulate the card with 125 kilohertz, you get this back. You get this pattern of highs and lows, and this, as far as I know, is still true today. Someone else may know better.
In 6002 labs, it's now one of the labs is they made you make these wire inductor coils.
Oh, I'm so happy.
Is this also like the traditional meme 858 project now?
I don't know, but it's a legitimate 670.
Oh man, I'm so happy. So you get these highs and lows, and you can actually read. So one thing you can do is you can just copy the card if you know the highs and lows. So we actually built this device. I had taken 6101, the analog lab. So we built this thing, and it's like an oscillator, and then these amazing analog devices, multipliers, which are like these perfect multipliers if you're doing like low frequency. So I made this like beautiful device with all my 6101 equipment. And here's the coil loop antenna. And this had 4 ID cards on it. It was mine, Jerry Sussman, Peter Mitros, and Hal Abelson. And when you push the button, it would randomly send one of those ID cards. And we put this in a nice big box, and I gave it to the most paranoid member of the new Stata Center, which was Richard Stallman, because he didn't want anyone to track where he was or record his entry or anything like that. So I gave him this box, and it was powered by this 9-volt battery, and it worked great until he lost it. Because, yeah, he was staying in, because, they didn't let him live in the building since 1998. They said, you can't sleep here anymore. Since 1998, so he had to get an apartment, but he always got like the cheapest possible apartment. So he lived in like this student apartment. I actually knew his like roommates. They were like, master's students, and then there's like RMS. So he lived there, and then he like didn't pay the rent or something, or like he got his apartment taken away, or he left his mail, he left all his stuff behind. And so eventually these students, including people I knew, they like threw out his like pile of junk, including this box that was so hard to make. They threw it out, and then eventually RMS shows up and is like, where's my stuff and where's my like decryptor box? And they're like, oh, all junk? Like, we threw it out. And then RMS had like, he was unhappy. So we made him another box. We made him another box, which I have here. Then my friend Josh took 6115, so we were able to miniaturize and get rid of all these analog components. So we made this very small box that's powered by these lithium batteries. It just has like one pink microprocessor, microcontroller, and lithium battery at the top there. So that had 4 people's ID cards in it. And I calculated that the battery would last like 5 years based on like the, watt hours of the lithium battery and how much we were using. And like I calculated it would last like 5 years. It lasted RMS like 2 months. I'm going to blame RMS on that and not my MIT electrical engineering education. I think there's no flaw there. But now when I am advising someone who's building battery-powered devices, and she's always like, the battery life is 10 years. And I was like, is it? Is it? So again, SIPB was very educational in my job. So we also discovered that the encryption, so the one thing they were very intent on is that you not be able to take the RF signal from the card and convert it into the magnetic stripe signal, because the magnetic stripe was used for purchasing books at the coop. You could like bill hundreds of dollars to your magnetic stripe, and they didn't want anyone to be able to take their RF signal, which is just transmitted everywhere, and convert that into the magnetic stripe. So we took 8 people's cards, like all our friends, and we read the magnetic stripe. We had this card reader in the SIPB office that Jayhawk had. We read the magnetic stripe, and we printed that out, and we read the RFID part with the oscilloscope, and we printed that out. It literally, just an oscilloscope reads out the MIT card. You don't need anything fancier than that. And we just printed them out, the pairs, and we just passed them out to people. And we're like, whoever can figure out the linkage between these 8, pairs of numbers is the winner. And eventually, we wrote a Perl script, and we cryptanalyzed it. It turns out the cipher is XOR. So if you take, you can read these bits off here. Every time there's a change, it's a 1. So 100, and here's the change, 100100001. You see how that turns into this. Then you slightly rearrange the bits. And I think some people have come along and found that it's actually a little more complicated than this, but this works at least for the 8 cards. And then you XOR with this key, which as far as I know is still the MIT secret key. Anyone think it's been changed? Probably not. Why would it? Yeah. Yeah, so that turns into this in binary, and then that's what's on the magnetic stripe. So this is the encryption. So if you have this, you could actually, convert to the magnetic stripe and steelbook. So we, dutifully gave this presentation to the head of enterprise services at MIT. And their main reaction was, so I brought in the equipment. This maybe before I gave it to RMS, I had this reader. Actually, no, I built this major reader. I took a board and put 4 nails in it, and I had a major thing, because the goal is stimulate your RFID card from across the room, put kilowatts into it. Fortunately, I blew out those transistors, because I probably would have hurt myself. Yeah, and the main thing was the guy was wearing the MIT master key card around his neck, and when he saw this presentation, he was like, "That's really cool," and he took it off and he threw it out the door, so we wouldn't be able to read it. What was that? Was it on fire? It was not on fire. No, I did set the transistor on fire. I was really more of a not an electrical talented person. So that was fun to do. I don't know that there were any repercussions. Oh yeah, we imagined they would so it was Motorola that had designed the system, and we imagined they would end up in a conflict, just like we had with the music industry or the record industry. But MIT is more conflict averse than I am, and so they ultimately just got some money back or something like that. And is this before who? Well, she's eternal. Barbara Streisand, she's still around. The Streisand effect. I think this was after the Streisand effect, yeah. I mean, I think the MIT was comfortable with the level of risk after this disclosure and did not feel any need to change things. So I think the final thing I'll talk about is our Sportcast project. This is when I really tried to lead SIPB into a different direction, and we got into sports broadcasting. So my friend Kaylin Murray was very into sports, and we had this idea that we would buy some cheap DV cameras. These were very cheap even in the 2004 era, and we would film the baseball or something like that, and I would have some fun writing some live video switching software, and maybe with some cool features, and make sure the audio and video are in sync. It's still very important to me. And we could, have some fun broadcasting baseball. And we put together this budget, actually, for the same organization that funded LAMP, for $11,000 that we could do it. And they said no. They said, we don't see any pedagogical value in broadcasting sports. So then we went back to our lives. And then 9 months later, they came back to us. It was May 2005. And they said, we have a ton of money left over in this budget. And we really want to explore this new technology called high definition HDTV, and we really want to have some demonstrations of that on campus. And so we want to buy these HDTVs, but we need some content to put on them. So could you come back with your proposal, and instead of DV cameras, which you could actually buy, can you do it for high definition and just tell us what it would cost? And I was like, well, that's tricky because like, I don't know anything about this. And you couldn't, in those days, you couldn't just buy this nice box that Quentin has right in front of him, like an HD switcher. How much did that cost? $9.95. You couldn't just buy these things. Like, there weren't HD switchers like for amateurs. It was just like for NBC. So I was like, I don't know how much it's going to cost. Like, we want to try something and then try something else. And they're like, well, it doesn't work that way. We have to spend this money by, May 30th, or, it won't be possible. So I was like, okay, well, we'll just plan conservatively here. I'll just buy and Jayhawk helped me put together the conservative list. So we bought like 2 full movable racks of equipment with like 16 servers and like everything you could possibly. I wanted to make sure we had enough like compute power to do live switching of high definition video. And we had some interest in HDTV even before that. So we set up an antenna in the SIPB office, and eventually we did one across on the 4th floor, and we ran through the cable. And we bought like in 2002, this is before you could really buy like a HDTV demodulator. So we bought like this Pro demodulator that you'd use like at a TV station, and it went into a ASI interface, then the ASI in, and the first thing we captured was this.
Does it taste like maple syrup, man?
Anyway, that was 2002. Still looks pretty good. So we captured that, and we got very into like understanding every bit of the HDTV broadcast coming from our local stations. Maybe, again, to a sort of obsessive degree like I had with the Matrix. And sometimes it just wouldn't work, because like not many people were watching HDTV back in 2002, and sometimes there'd be a problem that only we would see, like the audio wouldn't be working or something like that. And we had a very entitled attitude that I learned from Jayhawk, that like we were important. And so Jayhawk would just call all the extensions at the local TV station until we got the master control room. And so we got the number for NBC Master Control, the local NBC Master Control, and we used to have these files. You remember SIPB used to have all these master keys that they had obtained through dubious means. Like there used to be a box of keys, extremely powerful MIT keys just in the drawer. And like it was understood, like you wouldn't misuse these. You would only use it if you had a good reason. And we just... We just had these keys. And then one day there was a SIPB chair who was elected from Harvard who was like, we should not have these keys, and just like went to MIT and was like, tell us which keys are wrong and take them back. And I just felt like this was, I agree. But anyway, that's why you never let Harvard in. Remember. Anyway, it was a different time. So we used to feel that we were important. So one day, the audio was not working properly on the high definition feed from NBC. Everything else was working fine. And this was during the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And so we called NBC Master Control. And they're like very professional, these guys, because it's kind of a busy job. Like they have to hit the button for each commercial and like switch from the local to the, I mean, it's a stressful job. Like if you screw up a commercial, you just cost your company like $1 million. So they're picking up the phone, and Jayhawk's like, hello, NBC, this is Boston. We're having trouble getting the audio. And they're like, stand by, Boston. That's actually coming from Burbank. We'll patch in Burbank. So they like patch in Burbank, like which is where it's being broadcast from. And then, so they're like, go ahead, Boston. And Boston's like, we got Boston here. The audio's not working. Tell us, Boston, what's on here? And they ask us for some like debugging information. And Jayhawk's like, well, so we're not getting any audio packets from you. And they start to be like, are you from the NBC Boston affiliate? And Jayhawk's like, no, we're from MIT. And anyway, they actually did debug it with us. I was amazed that they were patient, but they wanted to know that the audio was broken. And so they were like, stand by, and then they like hit a button, and then our entire broadcast went from HD down to SD, like still over digital, but then the audio started working. And they were like, did that fix it? And Jayhawk was like, affirmative or something like that. And then they were like, goodbye. And then, like I think they were annoyed. I remember they were annoyed, but they didn't hang up on us. I think one time later, Jayhawk may have called them for something even more trivial than that, and they did tell him, like, please don't call here again. I don't remember, but I remember being repressed. Oh, okay, well, I only have one more thing. This is great. I will not get to any of my research. This is perfect. So, okay, great. So this was so anyway, we bought all these cameras, and we had these 4 high-definition cameras, and we bought all this equipment, and we actually went out and we broadcast the MIT sports. So we did some sports. I'll show you a little movie that they made about us.
Welcome to Zigzag. Help patients.
This is the MIT podcast. This is the event before us.
Spring is definitely in the air. Last week, MIT
for a spring break we're going. I'm going to Chile for
I'm helping a
Greenspun.
doctor from Hawaii pick up a new two-seat airplane called a Diamond Eclipse, and we're going to fly the airplane from London, Ontario to Hayward, California.
Is this me?
with software developed by out there. We've got just the thing for you. Senior Caitlin Murray is leading an innovative project called Sportcast, using high-definition cameras and a live computerized switcher with software developed by MIT grad student Keith Winstein.
Like Bartolata finds himself for three, and that's good. Bartolata with a three-point basket. 10-by-1, 10-by-3. Take three, three's online.
I try to do anything I can to get more sports into my life at MIT. It would be great if we could have it on television or on the radio or something like that.
Well, we got 4 cameras. They come into our computers here, and we go out on MIT cable.
One of the reasons we did this is that we couldn't get any of the national networks to cover MIT.
You can find out more about the latest developments with the project by going to sportcast.mit.edu. MIT professors are famed for
Anyway, so our most popular event turned out not to be that basketball game. By the way, did you notice at the basketball game, it's a buzzer beater and we lose the game. And then everybody's like, wah! I don't know, but the thing that actually was our most popular event was this one.
And by easy, I mean it's got to be quick and easy if you see the trick, which is by no means
So this
easy
was
itself.
3¼ hours that we broadcast. And we had just pioneered the split screen feature. So you can see here we have the integral on the bottom. This is the MIT integration beat. We have the integral on the bottom and this contestant and this contestant. We were very proud of that ability to set up the scenes.
Might have been.
And then the commentary was really good. The commentary, we always had Matt DeBurgalis as our play-by-play commentator for any sport. That guy is so good. He did women's hockey, he did football, he did basketball, and he did the integration. He did, and we just would always pair him with a sport subject matter expert. Who'd, I don't know. It was around the same time. So and then our color commentator was this guy, Albert Nee, who at the time was this like very nerdy guy, and subsequent to this went on to be very early at Dropbox. So I was, the guy who founded Dropbox, Drew Houston, I was his TA for 6033. He was a very good student. And then he tried to recruit my best friend, Wasim Daher, to be the #1 employee of Dropbox. And Wasim took me along. Wasim was very active in SIPB. Wasim wrote the Yes, You Can Use Our Stapler play. So Wasim took me on because he trusted me. And I had given him good advice before because he was asked to audition for Beauty and the Geek, the TV show, and I talked him out of it. So he trusted me. So he was also asked to be employee #1 at Dropbox, and I also talked him out of that. I was like, it just seems stupid. Like, we already have our public directories in AFS. Like, what's the big deal? I just don't get it. So he didn't do it. I basically cost my best friend like $100 million. But anyway, Albert Nee went on to Dropbox, and he became a totally different person. He became this like really cool guy, because also he was probably like a mega millionaire. And so I saw him like 15 years later at some Dropbox event. He was all dressed cool, and he's like blah, blah, blah. And all these people like worshiping him, oh, Mr. Nee. Anyway, and I was like, I remember you. You were the color commentator for the integration bee, which you created the integrals for. And this is in front of all these people worshiping me. He's like, no, I would never do anything so nerdy as that. No, I'm a cool startup West Coast guy. That's, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So I then found this on the old Sportcast web server, which was still up, and I uploaded it to YouTube. And I sent it to him, and I was like, no, this was totally you. And he's like, oh my God, I had blocked out those memories of when I was a nerd. So, this was another fun thing to do, and so I'm still using these skills today in our research. So I would say, I don't know, to me, SIPB, it's hard to replicate. It's like having all these people that love you and always tell you you suck. I really would not give it up for the world. So thank you.
Down the video.
The real question is, why did you ask for an offer first?
Why did I ask for what?
Why didn't you ask him for an offer?
Why didn't I ask him for money? Well, they currently have this problem. Is the next speaker here? Should I get off the stage?
No, he's running late.
So I do have this problem where I make people hate me. So in connection with Dropbox 4 years ago, the producers of this TV show Silicon Valley, the HBO show, they come to visit the actual Silicon Valley to meet with people to get ideas for the show. And 4 years ago, they came up to meet with Dropbox, and I had been consulting at Dropbox. And so I was there, so I met with them in the room, and we talked about various ideas. I think tabs versus spaces, we talked about, and that later ended up on the show. And now, so now I've talked to them again a lot for this upcoming, their final season. And, you know, I gave them various ideas. I mean, I don't know what they're going to use, but I've talked to them a whole bunch of times. But they keep sending me this contract that's like a very strict non-disclosure agreement. And they're offering to pay $200, but in exchange, I have to not ever tell anyone that I consulted for the show, not even my employer. And once it comes out, I'm allowed to incidentally mention it, but I can only make positive comments. So this is the HBO contract. Like, my student asked me, is this why none of the actors in the final season of Game of Thrones are honest about it? And I was like, well, I'm sure they had to sign the same contract I did. You know, me and Daenerys were like the same. So anyway, and I can only make positive comments, and I'm supposed to indemnify them if they get sued because, you know, of some idea I gave them. I have to pay their legal bills. So I was just like, I just ignored it. And then they sent it to me again, and I was like, you know, I don't really see why I would even read this contract, you know, much less actually negotiate it with you. There seems to be no reason to. So they're actually very annoyed about this. And I mean, I think only through the skills of SIPB did I learn how to be such an asshole. What's that? Well, so they have made fun of people like me on the show before. So the Jared character, some of the things that happened to the Jared character. So for example, when we had K-Splice, which Jeff founded, and Jeff and Wasim and Tim founded, and I was like the Jared at K-Splice, because I was like the business guy at this tech company, and I was like a middle manager with no reports. And one thing I did have influence in was I was there when we expanded, and we hired Christine Spang and Jessica McKellar to work there. And I thought it went great. And much later, Jessica consulted for the show for Silicon Valley, and I don't know what she said, but even later than that, I watched the show, and they have this female engineer on the show, Carla, and they have this investor, Monica. And I think Carla on the show says, I hate it when there's two women involved in a company because there's always pressure on them to be friends with each other. And there's this scene that where like Carla and Monica are there, and then Jared's like all creepily trying to like get them to be friends. And I realized that this was Jessica's way of talking about me. And that I had to see this in a TV show about myself. It was a very roundabout way of self-knowledge, my management style. Anyway, SIPB taught me that. Everything I know about... Yes, Ben?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had an unrelated question.
Please.
So my unrelated question is, do you know why why do stations still send 1080i streams? Why doesn't everybody use progressive streams at this point?
You can hold battle with the old things.
Well, the truth is... Okay, fine. Well, this won't be funny. Okay, the truth is that there is a category of MPEG levels called main profile at high level. And this is what governs Blu-ray discs and high-definition television. It's the same category of allowable formats, main profile at high level. And the restriction is that you can do 10, okay, it didn't work anyway. You can do 1080, other end. Okay, we don't have this. 1080, P24, you can do 1080, P30, you can do 1080, let's call it I30. Well, you can't do 1080p60, or you can do 720p60. So these are the things that you're allowed to do in main profile at high level. And that's true of a Blu-ray. It's true of 1995 era high-definition television. I mean, the reason I got a job at the Wall Street Journal is because when I was on the tech, I discovered that MIT had switched its vote to be in favor of the Dolby audio standard in exchange for $30 million. So like we, MIT, were very involved in the standardization. This is one of the things that they voted on. So anyway, these are the allowable formats. And the truth is that when you are watching a Blu-ray disc, you are probably watching this. And when you are watching a primetime show on television that is at 24 frames per second, you are probably also, in any practical sense, watching this.
What?
A 1080p 24. Now, the real truth is that the television stations don't want to have to switch the headers. This is the worst conclusion to a talk ever. Anyway, I had this whole message about how SIPB helped me become an asshole. Anyway, fine. The television stations don't want to have to switch the headers between different types of content. So their primetime content is at 24 frames per second, but sometimes the news or the soap operas are at 60 fields per second. And if you switch the headers, you don't guarantee gapless playback because you have to send a sequence end header and then a sequence begin header. So instead, the sequence header always specifies this one. But that doesn't mean that they're sending...
Which one is that?
1080i30. It's interlaced, 60 fields per second, 30 frames per second. That's what the sequence header says. But the way they make those 60 fields per second is up to them. And during prime time, they make it by sending 24 progressive frames per second. And that's what can be displayed on your television, even though the television has the option of interlacing it.
And then we get to the question of the whole scope and aspect ratios.
The whole scope aspect ratio. That is why I missed my flight home freshman year Thanksgiving, was about aspect ratios. Oh, 1080. Okay, so the television standard, the television standard that was standardized in, the early 90s. So there was a competition. So the Japanese, people remember that used to be a country we were scared of, like in the 30s and also the 80s. So in the late 80s, they developed, great, thank you. You must be the new person. No, terrible.
I can come down and
That's fine.
people if you want.
No.
No. There's plenty of time.
Okay. In the late 80s, the Japanese created high-definition television, and it was analog, because Japan is a very narrow country, longitudinally aligned, and so they can serve Japan with a single geostationary satellite. And so they had plenty of analog bandwidth from satellite, and so they had analog high-definition television called the NHK system. And so there was a lot of fear that the American television manufacturing industry would fall to the Japanese. This is also what the movie Die Hard is about, fear of Japanese economic progress. And so the Federal Communications Commission decided that we would need to have a contest to design an American high-definition standard. And so they had a contest, and there were various entries, and one of them was from MIT, led by Schreiber and Jay Lim, to have the MIT high-definition television standard. And there was the other entries were all from companies. There was one from General Instrument that's now like Cisco, and there was one from Philips that was like the European standard. So these were the entrants. And there was one from NHK, was the Japanese system. And the first thing they said was, we're going to throw out the analog system, and we're going to make this risky technical choice to have a digital system, which was not so clear in 1989. And they encouraged the four remaining participants to join together and create a best of the best system, which was called the Grand Alliance. And so these four entrants were supposed to get into a room and agree on the system. It was MIT, General Instrument, AT&T, and Philips, which was the Europeans. And it was, the patent rights were in the balance. It was quite tricky. And so they agreed on a standard where all of the pictures would be in a ratio of 16 by 9. So we would have, the best you could have would be 1,920 columns by 1,080 rows. And this is a 16 by 9 ratio. And that would be for the brightness, the luma. And then the colors would be at half this ratio. So the colors would be at 960 for the colors and 540 for the colors for the rows. And this is still what you get on a Blu-ray today, unless it's a 4K Blu-ray. So that is the raw video that is encoded either over high-definition television or on a Blu-ray disc. And this was all worked out by, a lot of it was by people at MIT. The controversial part from my angle was the audio standard, where MIT had their own audio standard. It was very, there's the right way, and there's the wrong way, and then there's the MIT way, which is like halfway between the two and like 20 years earlier. So the MIT audio standard was like, let's use lots of bits and it'll be perfect. And then the other competitors were MPEG, MP2, and Dolby. And at the first vote, there were 2 votes for MIT, 1 for MPEG, and 1 for Dolby. So nobody had a majority. And then Dolby made a deal with MIT. Well, Dolby had a deal with MIT, which they reconfirmed on the night of the vote, that if MIT switched its vote to be for Dolby, and Dolby won, MIT would get ultimately $30 million. And that's what happened. MIT switched its vote, the other people switched their vote, Dolby won. So now Dolby audio is the standard, remains the standard for broadcast television in the United States, and Dolby gets all this patent revenue. And the way we know about this is that Dolby declined to pay They said, well, there's some technicality. It took too long for it to be standardized, so we will not pay. And so MIT sued them. And it went to court, and I was on the tech, and I was very into lawsuits. And so I dug up all the records, and I found that the case had settled at the last minute. And so I went to the courthouse, and I got the records, and it had settled. So it wasn't clear who had won. And they had told, the jurors, like, please, just because MIT is this wonderful nonprofit university and Dolby is this greedy West Coast company, don't pay any mind to that. It's just an ordinary litigation about a contract. And it had been settled confidentially. But there had been one very persnickety, SIPB-style juror, like maybe it was the Jayhawk when he's a juror, who had kept raising his hand to ask questions from the jury box. And eventually the judge had told him to please shut up, and if you have a question, send us a letter. And so he had, this juror, and so that was in the case file, was a letter from the juror being like, exactly when did Dolby say this, and exactly blah, blah, blah. And it had his return address on it. So it was like this envelope in the box. Have people seen the movie Spotlight? It was just like that. It was just like that, So I found the letter with the guy's name, and I looked him up in the phone book, and I called the juror. He's a very nice elderly guy. And he told me the whole thing. He said, yeah, when we saw how slimy that West Coast for-profit Mr. Dolby was, we definitely were going to give it to MIT, our local, university, which is probably why they settled. And he told me that the judge had told him that the settlement was $30 million. So I put that in the article, and MIT, it was a great article. That's how I got a job at the Wall Street Journal. But ultimately, MIT accepted $30 million from Dolby to make that, to vote for that for the national standard. So, that's the world we live in. All right. I do have to go. Thank you all. I love SIPB. Thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And
Thanks
for giving a talk. It was great.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, I think we're still waiting on our next speaker, about 5 minutes or so. Take this opportunity as a quick break. If you need to stretch your legs, use the restroom, whatnot, feel free. We'll be reconvening soon. Same.